Welcome back, Nightmare Hunters. And if you're new here, a huge welcome to the HOA Nightmare Files, your ultimate destination for jaw-dropping true stories of HOA overreach and the epic battles against it. Before we dive into today's unbelievable tale, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. And while you're down there, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you're always the first to find out when our latest HOA nightmare hits the screen. All right, let's get into this video.
You know, I always thought inheriting my grandfather's old lakeside cabin would be about quiet mornings, the smell of pine, and the gentle lapping of waves against the dock. I pictured long weekends, maybe some fishing, definitely no drama. Boy, was I wrong. Dead wrong. Because what I inherited wasn't just a cabin, it was a battleground, and the general on the opposing side was none other than Brenda Maxwell, president of the Lakeside Serenity Estates Homeowners Association. And trust me, Brenda wore her perceived authority like a slightly ill-fitting toupee, noticeable but doing its job. I'm Elara Vance, and 6 months ago, after my amazing Grandpa Silas passed, I became the proud, albeit slightly overwhelmed, owner of his beloved cabin. Grandpa Silas was one of those salt-of-the-earth types, always had a twinkle in his eye and a story to tell, usually about the land. He'd lived here his whole life, his father and grandfather before him. He always talked about the 40 acres it sat on, including a beautiful 30-acre protected wildlife preserve out back, teeming with deer, wild turkeys, and every manner of bird you could imagine. What he didn't mention, or maybe I just never fully grasped the implications of, was the true extent of his domain. I learned that the hard way. Life at the cabin was idyllic at first. I'd wake with the sun, drink my coffee on the porch, watching the mist rise off the water. I spent my days exploring the trails through the preserve, sketching the local flora and fauna, and in the afternoons, I'd take Grandpa's old fishing boat, the Rusty Anchor, out onto the lake. It was a perfectly functional, if not picturesque, little vessel, an old aluminum rowboat with a small, sputtering outboard motor. Grandpa and I had spent countless hours in that boat, him teaching me how to cast, how to bait a hook, how to tell when a fish was nibbling just right. It held so many memories, and it felt right to have it moored at the end of the rickety old dock, ready for a quick escape onto the water. Then came the first official-looking letter. It was tucked into my mailbox, standing out starkly against the junk mail like a venomous serpent. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, with the HOA's rather grandiose logo in Boston gold, a stylized sailboat against a backdrop of rolling hills. Unauthorized watercraft, it declared, in violation of Section 3.12 of the Lakeside Serenity Estates HOA bylaws. It demanded immediate removal and levied a $50 fine. My first reaction was to laugh. Unauthorized? It was my dock. And frankly, it was Grandpa's boat, practically an antique. I figured it was some kind of bureaucratic error, maybe a new rule they hadn't properly publicized, and I'd just call them and sort it out. I tossed the letter onto the counter and went back to enjoying my coffee. A week later, a second letter arrived, this one more stern, citing the previous warning and doubling the fine to $100. This time, there was no laughing. There was a prickle of annoyance. I tried calling the number on the letter, but it went straight to an automated system that only allowed you to pay fines or leave a message. I left a message explaining the situation calmly, thinking a human would call me back and clarify. No one did. Instead, a few days later, Brenda Maxwell herself arrived, unannounced, uninvited, on my porch. It was a Tuesday morning. I was in my oldest paint-splattered t-shirt, working on restoring an antique rocking chair. She stood there, clipboard clutched like a holy relic, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows, like tiny, angry caterpillars planning world domination, furrowed in disapproval. Her smile was plastered on, a cheap veneer over a house of cards. She was probably in her late 50s, with a helmet of suspiciously immovable blonde hair, and she wore a crisp, tailored linen suit despite the humid summer air. She looked like she was conducting a military inspection, not visiting a private residence. "Miss Vance," she began, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness that made my teeth ache. "We've had several complaints about your unsightly vessel. This is, after all, a shared community lake, and we strive for aesthetic uniformity. Your boat, frankly, detracts from the pristine image we cultivate here at Lakeside Serenity Estates." Shared community lake? Pristine image? I politely but firmly informed her it was my dock on my private property, and the boat was Grandpa's, a family heirloom. It wasn't unsightly, it was charming. She just sniffed, a barely audible sound of disdain. "The lake is HOA property, Miss Vance. Your dock merely abuts it. Our bylaws are very clear. Section 3.12. All watercraft on Lake Serenity must be approved by the Architectural Review Board, registered annually, and conform to aesthetic guidelines. Your vessel meets none of these criteria. Remove the boat or the fines will escalate. Furthermore, we've noted several other infractions." And they escalated. Oh, how they escalated. Every other day, another notice would arrive, each one more absurd than the last, each fine higher. For the boat, for excessive dock protrusion, apparently my dock extended too far into their lake, for non-conforming water feature reflectivity. I kid you not, that one was about the sun glinting off the boat's slightly rusty hull. Then came fines for my natural landscaping, which they deemed unmaintained wilderness compared to the manicured lawns of the development. They cited non-conforming outdoor decor when I put out Grandpa's old wooden carved owl. My property taxes weren't even this creative. The fines quickly jumped into the hundreds, then thousands. They were clearly designed to bleed me dry, to make the cabin an unbearable financial burden, to force me to sell. It was absurd. A symphony of passive aggression, with only my bank account applauding. I tried talking to other neighbors, some of the older folks who had lived here longer. Mrs. Henderson, a sweet lady down the road, told me, "Oh, Brenda's a terror. She tried to fine me for my bird feeder being too loud. She's always been like this, ever since she became president. It's like she enjoys making everyone miserable." Another neighbor, Mr. Davies, a retired engineer, muttered about how Brenda seemed to get special treatment for her own property, skirting rules she enforced on others. This sparked a timely, nagging suspicion in my mind. The psychological toll started to weigh on me. Every time I heard a car pull up, my heart would pound. Every time I saw a uniform envelope, my stomach would churn. I was losing the peace I had found. I knew I needed help. Real help. I remembered Grandpa always talking about his lawyer, old Mr. Abernathy, down in the county seat. He was practically a relic himself, probably close to 90, sharp as a tack, but moved at the pace of a slow-motion film. He always said, "If you ever get into a pickle, Elara, go see Abernathy. He knows the land better than anyone, and he never forgets a detail." I made an appointment. When I explained the situation, detailing Brenda Maxwell's escalating harassment and the ridiculous fines, he just peered over his spectacles with a faint twinkle in his eye. He listened patiently, occasionally scribbling notes on a legal pad. "Brenda Maxwell, you say? Ah, yes. Her mother was just as particular. Beatrice Maxwell. She was on the original founding committee of the HOA back in the early 80s. Thought she was queen of the county, too. Funny how history repeats itself, isn't it?" He chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "Silas always said she was trying to boss the whole county even before the HOA existed. Well, Elara, Silas left you more than just a cabin, dear girl. He left you a legacy, a very well-documented legacy, if I recall." He then rose, with a slow, deliberate grace, and walked over to a heavy oak filing cabinet. The air in his office was thick with the scent of old paper and leather, a comforting smell, like history itself. He pulled out a large, heavy drawer, rummaged for a moment, and then, with the theatrical flair of a seasoned performer, pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder. It was tied with a faded ribbon. Inside were documents yellowed with age, brittle to the touch, handwritten in elegant flowing script. They smelled of time and impermanence. "These," he announced, tapping a finger on the top page, "are the original land deeds from 1875. Your great-great-grandfather, Bartholomew Vance, purchased this land from the county. All of it. Not just the 40 acres where the cabin stands, and not just the wildlife preserve, which Silas explicitly delineated in his will as a perpetual conservation easement. No, Elara. Bartholomew, being a rather shrewd man, purchased the full, undiluted title to everything. This includes the entire lake, every single drop of water from shoreline to shoreline, and," he leaned forward, a triumphant grin spreading across his face, "all the land within a mile of its shore, free, clear, and unencumbered by any future association bylaws, covenants, or restrictions. It predates the Lakeside Serenity Estates HOA by over a century. Their rules simply don't apply to your property." My jaw must have hit the floor. The entire lake? A mile around it? My little cabin wasn't just lakeside. It was the nucleus of a vast private domain. It turned out Grandpa had known all along. He just had never felt the need to flaunt it. He loved his quiet life, and he probably found Brenda's mother, and now Brenda, more amusing than threatening. He just loved seeing them squirm, knowing he held the ultimate trump card. He had, however, quietly ensured all the paperwork was meticulously kept, knowing one day it might be needed. He'd even had it cross-referenced and refiled at the county courthouse just a few years before he passed, just to make sure. Smart old man. Armed with this bombshell, I felt a surge of energy, a calm determination settling over me. The anxiety that had been gnawing at me for weeks began to recede, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. We had the truth, and the truth, backed by 150-year-old legal documents, was powerful. Mr. Abernathy, now fully energized, became my co-conspirator. We decided to play it close to the vest, letting Brenda dig her own grave deeper. For the next few weeks, I let the fines pile up, ignoring the increasingly shrill certified letters. Brenda, emboldened by my apparent inaction, only intensified her campaign. She started sending inspection notices, threatening to enter my property, to assess compliance. I sent back polite, one-sentence replies drafted by Mr. Abernathy, stating simply, "Access denied. Private property." She even had some of her cronies, members of her inner circle on the HOA board, drive by slowly, sometimes stopping to stare at the cabin or my boat as if daring me to challenge them. I even caught one of them trying to take pictures from my shoreline, which was, of course, my property. Mr. Abernathy simply advised me to install security cameras, which I promptly did. The ant colony operated with the ruthless efficiency of a tiny, unyielding corporation, oblivious to the fact that their queen was about to be dethroned. I also started doing my own quiet investigation. I attended other HOA meetings, just sitting in the back, observing. I noticed that Brenda had an uncanny ability to push through motions that seemed to benefit only a few select properties, often her own, or those of her closest allies on the board. There were vague line items in the budget for lake maintenance and shoreline beautification that seemed suspiciously high, with no clear breakdown of expenses. I remembered Mr. Davies' comment about her getting special treatment. I spoke to other long-term residents, those who weren't afraid of Brenda. They shared stories of arbitrary rule enforcement, of Brenda throwing lavish community parties at the clubhouse that seemed more like private affairs for her friends, paid for by HOA fees. One elderly couple, the Millers, had been fined for putting up a small, tasteful bird bath because it disrupted the natural flow of the landscape. They had given up fighting. Their frustration simmered, a quiet resentment. Meanwhile, Mr. Abernathy and I were busy. He meticulously compiled a dossier, copies of my original deeds, all the HOA's threatening letters and fines, timestamps from my new security cameras showing unauthorized individuals on my property, sworn affidavits from other residents detailing Brenda's past abuses, and the suspicious financial irregularities. We had everything we needed to not only shut down Brenda's attacks on me, but potentially to expose her deeper corruption. The next HOA general meeting was announced with much fanfare, Brenda clearly planning a public spectacle to finally deal with the rogue new homeowner. I received a special invitation, almost a summons, detailing the agenda item, resolution regarding continued noncompliance and escalating fines, Miss Elara Vance property. Brenda was setting me up for a public shaming, a final act of humiliation before she presumably foreclosed on me. She had a personality like an unskippable ad, pervasive and increasingly irritating. She thought she was going to be the hero of the community, finally bringing a defiant homeowner to heel. She had no idea she was walking into her own carefully laid trap. The night of the meeting arrived. The community hall was packed. Every chair was taken and people stood along the walls. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, a mixture of curiosity, apprehension, and, for some, a morbid desire to see the new girl get taken down by Brenda. Brenda Maxwell sat at the head table, flanked by her two most loyal board members, both looking smug and self-important. She wore a particularly striking leopard print ensemble, her signature look, as if daring anyone to question her authority. She beamed at the assembled residents, clearly relishing the moment. "Good evening, everyone," Brenda's voice boomed, amplified by a cheap microphone that crackled slightly. "We have several important items, but first we must address a persistent issue of noncompliance that has, frankly, become a drain on our community resources." She paused, letting her gaze sweep over the room, finally settling on me, a condescending smirk on her face. "Miss Elara Vance, would you please approach the podium?" I rose calmly, with Mr. Abernathy by my side, clutching his leather briefcase. A ripple of whispers went through the room. I walked to the podium, ignoring Brenda's triumphant sneer. "Before we discuss any non-compliance, Miss Maxwell," I began, my voice steady, "I believe there's a more fundamental issue we need to address." Brenda's fader faltered. "Miss Vance, this is not the time for theatrics. You are here to address the escalating fines." "No, Miss Maxwell," Mr. Abernathy interjected, stepping forward slightly, his presence commanding despite his age. "Miss Vance is here tonight to address the persistent, illegal trespassing by the Lakeside Serenity Estates HOA onto her private property and the fraudulent collection of fees for amenities that are not and have never been community property."
A gasp went through the room. Brenda's face went from smug to confused, then to a rather alarming shade of puce. "What nonsense is this?" she spluttered, pounding her gavel. "Order! Order!" "No, you will have order, Miss Maxwell," Mr. Abernathy said, his voice quiet but piercing. He opened his briefcase and slowly, meticulously pulled out the thick, leather-bound folder. He placed it gently on the podium. "You see, members of the Lakeside Serenity Estates HOA, your esteemed president has been operating under a rather significant delusion. She has been collecting fees for lake maintenance, dictating rules for its use, and attempting to fine my client, Miss Vance, for her activities on what she claims is HOA property. However, this simply isn't true." He then began to read, slowly, clearly, from the original 1875 land deeds. He described Bartholomew Vance's original purchase, the meticulous boundaries, the legal terminology that left no room for ambiguity. When he got to the part about all waters contained within the surveyed boundaries extending 1 mile inland from the shoreline, you could hear a pin drop. The silence was absolute, broken only by Brenda's ragged breathing. "Therefore," Mr. Abernathy concluded, looking directly at Brenda, "Lake Serenity, and indeed all land within a mile of its shores, legally belongs solely to the Vance family, and currently to Miss Elara Vance. It has never, at any point, been part of your HOA's jurisdiction. Any attempt to enforce rules, levy fines, or collect fees related to this lake constitutes trespass, harassment, and potentially fraud. Brenda's face went from puce to a mottled purple. She stammered, she spluttered, she accused. "These are fakes, old, irrelevant documents. Our bylaws supersede ancient history," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Not when the ancient history establishes prior ownership, Miss Maxwell," Mr. Abernathy calmly retorted. "These deeds predate your HOA by over 100 years. They are legally ironclad. We have also documented numerous instances of HOA members, under your instruction, illegally accessing Miss Vance's private property to monitor and photograph her, constituting further trespass and invasion of privacy. We have the camera footage, Miss Maxwell. We even have footage of your own landscapers paid for by lake maintenance funds working on your personal property." That last bit hit like a bombshell. The murmuring in the crowd intensified, turning into angry shouts. Other homeowners who had suffered under Brenda's petty tyranny for years started speaking up. "What about the clubhouse renovation fund that never materialized?" someone yelled. "Where did the money for the new security gate really go?" shouted another. The accusations started flying, not just about the lake, but about every suspicious expense, every arbitrary rule. The argument was a symphony of passive aggression, with only the neighbors applauding. Brenda pounded her gavel, but her authority had evaporated like mist in the morning sun. Her two loyal board members looked terrified, already distancing themselves. The meeting descended into utter chaos. People demanded Brenda's resignation, demanded an audit of the HOA's finances. Mr. Abernathy, with a sly wink at me, handed over a thick binder to one of the more outspoken residents, a retired accountant, who had clearly been waiting for an opportunity like this. The binder contained all the evidence of Brenda's financial improprieties and other abuses of power that we had quietly collected. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The story of the lake, the land, and the 1875 deed spread like wildfire. Local news picked it up, and Brenda Maxwell, once the self-proclaimed queen of Lakeside Serenity, became a national meme. The HOA was forced to issue a public apology to me, which I insisted they frame and hang in their community center, right next to their newly vacant president's office. They had to rescind every single fine, not just mine, but anyone else who had been unjustly targeted for minor infractions, especially those related to the lake. Brenda Maxwell resigned, or was encouraged to resign, depending on who you talk to, in a cloud of humiliation. The investigation that followed, spearheaded by the retired accountant and other civic-minded residents, uncovered a web of financial misconduct. It turned out Brenda had been using HOA funds for personal expenses for years, lavish vacations disguised as board retreats, high-end landscaping for her own front yard under the guise of community beautification projects, and even paying her niece's company exorbitant rates for administrative services. The DA's office got involved, and the ant colony, once ruthless in its trivial pursuits, now operated with even greater efficiency in digging up Brenda's dirt. Charges were filed for embezzlement and fraud. Brenda ended up with hefty fines and a suspended sentence, narrowly avoiding jail time due to her age and a plea deal, but her reputation was in tatters, her social standing in the community utterly destroyed. She eventually sold her house and moved away, presumably to boss around a new unsuspecting neighborhood, though I doubt she'll ever forget Lake Serenity. My lake, my land, my peace. It's all returned. And the rusty anchor still sits proudly at my dock, a testament to a battle won not with aggression, but with patience, good legal advice, and a very old piece of paper. The community is different now. The new HOA board is made up of sensible, democratically elected residents who actually care about the community, not their own power trips. They even approached me respectfully about forming a volunteer lake stewardship committee to protect the wildlife and ensure responsible use. An idea I was happy to collaborate on as long as it remained voluntary and respected my property rights. The biggest lesson from all this? Power.
Even the tiny, insignificant power of an HOA presidency can corrupt if left unchecked. But when ordinary people, armed with facts and determination, and perhaps a shrewd lawyer and some very old deeds, decide to stand up, even the most entrenched suburban tyrant can be toppled. You just have to know your history, read the fine print from 1875, and never let anyone tell you what you can and cannot do on your own property. It just goes to show, never underestimate a quiet new homeowner with a knack for investigation and a very good reason to fight back. What's the craziest HOA story you've ever heard? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of entitlement getting its just desserts.